Hey everyone, so I am here with Sarah Smith running to represent Washington's ninth District, and she is part of brand new Congress. So I'm here with her. She's going to talk about her campaign. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, hey, I appreciate what you're doing. You are running a campaign based exclusively on grassroots donations, zero corporate dollars, no super PAC. So at this point, it's safe to say that that's a really difficult thing to do in this day and age when money drives politics. So what made you want to run a grassroots campaign with brand new Congress as opposed to basically just taking the easy way out and taking lots of corporate money?
Because I guess the famous saying is the easy thing and the hard, or the right thing and the easy thing aren't always the same. So I've grown up pretty much since the crash happened, since Wall Street got away with taking trillions of dollars ultimately from individual people. I've grown up in a generation that's suspicious of money in politics anyway. But now that I've gotten older and we've seen it come out more and more and more, and we've seen the effects that major contributions that super PACs can have on candidates' votes and on incumbents' votes, I just don't. That's messy for me. I don't want to represent businesses. I want to represent people. So why would I take money from businesses if I want to represent people?
Right. And now I think with all the skepticism in politics about how politics, they'll say one thing and then they get elected and they do something entirely different. We now know that that's almost always the direct result of money. So it makes sense that if you are wanting to represent the people, you only take money from the people. So I think that's great. Now, one thing that I always ask to people running for Congress is there is a bill in Congress, Representative John Conyers, HR 676. So if you're elected, would you co-sponsor that?
Absolutely. So I've told the story about my dad a lot. My dad is an older gentleman. He's part of the greatest generation. He survived the Nazi V2 bombings that leveled London. He worked 4 jobs. He put himself through college. He came from nothing. And I learned more about his story very recently. My dad's story is long and storied itself. But so he worked 4 jobs. He left England. He came here with almost nothing, and he started to try and build this life for us, and he did, and he seized it. And then Wall Street crash happened, and it took everything. It pushed us to sell our house. It pushed me to go live on my own at 17. It was a really hard time, but he survived it. He made it through. He pulled through, and now my family is fine and happy. He survived all of that, and he was hospitalized and almost died after all of that because he stepped on a stinging nettle when he was gardening. And it was actually Medicare that saved my dad's life. My dad had access to Medicare. He was able to go to the hospital. My parents walked out with no medical debt. And medical bankruptcy is the #1 reason for bankruptcy in this country. So my family was terrified that we were going to be staring down the brink of this. But then Medicare kicked in and we walked out. My parents were able to push through it. And it just seems crazy to me that we have a system right now that thinks people choose to get sick, that people have any kind of agency in that. So absolutely, I would support HR 676 Medicare for All. And not 13 years after it was introduced, I would support it from day one.
That's a great distinction to make. So here's what I want to ask you, though, to kind of follow up with that. So what would you say to other Democrats who respond by saying, well, I can't co-sponsor HR 676 right now because the Affordable Care Act is constantly under attack. I have to take all the energy I have and dedicate it to protecting the ACA. So what would you say to that?
I'd say that they're trying to turn it into this arbitrary distinction that's one or the other. But it's not about one or the other. You can have both. You can co-sign HR 676 while still trying to prop up Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. You don't have to choose between the two. In fact, the Affordable Care Act right now still has a lot that needs to be sorted out. It still has a lot of its own problems. And HR 676, Medicare for All, would alleviate a lot of those problems. So these Democrats that are saying I can't right now should be signing on to it in addition to helping defend the Affordable Care Act, because the Affordable Care Act is going to help bridge the gap until we can implement HR 676. So they go hand in hand. It's not either or.
Right, and I think that's a really important point to make. Now, one thing that I wanted to ask you about is kind of with that critique that we see against people who are pushing for Medicare for all, like you and I. Would you say that the Democratic Party, by and large, the label itself is becoming increasingly unpopular, even though we have Donald Trump as president? I mean, what would you say the Democratic Party, by and large, needs to fix, if you can kind of narrow it down to a couple of different things?
I think the Democratic Party needs to really make a decision on who they want to represent. I've been a lifelong Democrat myself, and the party itself has changed so much. And when you look at the timeline, we just keep moving farther and farther right. And people talk about obstructionist, and I had someone say, oh, you want to go to Congress and be an obstructionist. But that's not what I want to do, and that's not what the Democrats should be doing. But they shouldn't let themselves be pulled farther and farther right. We all need to make compromises. I understand that. But right now, the only side that's compromised is the Democrats, and they've compromised at the expense of the working people. And that's who they were established to represent. That's what our party is all about. Our whole mantra is the working party, right? We're the party of the working class. But we're not fighting for the working class. And sometimes fighting means making sure you understand what concessions you should and shouldn't make. And so I'm tired of watching Democrats make concessions and continue to take corporate money, and then continue to participate in acts of self-sabotage, really, because we look back at the Democratic election, at the Democratic presidential primary, and there's this borderline self-sabotage where they're trying to tell their voters what you want or what you need. And the last thing I need as a young female millennial is a person that has never been a young female millennial telling me what I need when I'm trying to clearly spell it out for them. So I think they need to start listening and stop telling.
And I think that you know what you need. We all know what we need. So that's such an important point. They need to listen and stop telling us. But, it seems as though they don't really want to do that. So that's why I'm very thankful for campaigns like yours and organizations like Justice Democrats and Brand New Congress, because you guys are actually listening to people. The difference between your campaign and campaigns of corporate Democrats, if you will, is that they never talk to constituents. And I don't know how you can represent a district if you're not in that district. So it's really strange to me. I don't know if you heard about the article from Politico, to where Democrats were actually holding meetings on how to talk to people. And if you have to have a meeting on how to talk to people, or maybe it was a seminar, then I think you're a little bit out of touch. Now, another really important thing that I want to touch on is net neutrality, because you're already at a disadvantage because you're not taking corporate money. But with your types of campaign, and it goes for Stephen Jaffe, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, without the internet, I think that your guys' campaigns would be really, really much more disadvantaged, pretty much. So do you have anything to say about net neutrality and what you could possibly do to fight for it in Congress?
Net neutrality is so important. Maintaining a neutral space on the internet is something that I absolutely intend to advocate for. I grew up a child of the internet. When I was very young, the internet started to become a big thing. I remember our first Macintosh computer coming into the house, and I remember AOL back when
Me too.
It was first cool.
Yep.
So I'm a child of the internet. I recognize the benefits, and I've seen the improvements we've made because of free access to it. And the way that I look at net neutrality is I actually look at it as an issue of free speech. So the internet is now, it's the digital free speech platform. It's kind of like how college campuses all have this free speech area. This is like such a general free speech area. The internet needs to remain open because it's an open trade of information. It's an open trade of conversation. It's an open sharing and responding to ideas. This is a free speech problem. This isn't a problem of internet companies. This isn't a problem of utilities. This is a problem of people having access to information and the access to respond to that information in kind. So this is something that I would definitely treat as more in line with the First Amendment than anything else.
I agree with that 100%. Now, would you say, let's say hypothetically speaking, that net neutrality does go the way of the dodo? How would you think that would impact your campaign? Let's say you were running your campaign where we don't have net neutrality. Do you think that would hurt your campaign?
I definitely think it has the potential to impact any campaign because essentially cable companies can decide, oh, this person is someone I want this person to vote for. So their page is free. But if you want to access the grassroots campaigns, if you want to access these other candidates, you have to pay extra. So then people are paying more money just to be able to know who is even running in their area, but they know that this person's running for free. So it's kind of like they get to tell you who you should vote for without telling you who you should vote for. And it all circles back to free speech. They shouldn't be allowed to tell me what I can and can't say and what I can and can't read. It's akin to seeing somebody go into the library and pull out all the encyclopedias and say, you can't have this aggregate of information. You can only buy them one at a time. And it's something very similar in that vein to me. So I think campaigns like this one, campaigns like Alexandria's, like Paula Jean's, I think all of our campaigns would face the potential that we could suffer, and we'd struggle more under this chokehold that the two-party system already has. Because right now we have this dichotomy of two parties, and lack of net neutrality is just going to exacerbate that problem.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I could totally see that. Now, one thing that I wanted to ask you about is even though you're running as a Democrat, it seems as though the ideas that you're espousing aren't necessarily in line with the aggregate party. So my question is, what would you do if you were elected to kind of help break up that two-party duopoly, or at least move towards opening up our democracy? I mean, would you support something like ranked choice voting or proportional representation, even if that might put up a barrier to you getting reelected if you were to win?
So the big thing is, especially in my mind, is it's not about me, right? It's not about my being reelected. It's about what's best for our country and what's going to help other people have the opportunity. So I've got this unique chance to step up and challenge an incumbent and run this campaign. I want to make sure that if the times change and representation wants to change and people want someone new, that they have that ability to challenge me and take over that seat. I am very much in favor of ranked choice voting. I think this chokehold that we've got has become this snowball effect. We've got this two-party chokehold. We've got money in politics. We've got special interest lobbyists. We have things like pharmaceutical companies spending so much more money on lobbying than they are on actually researching, and it's just become this packed house of cards that has to come down at some point in time. And I think ranked choice voting would do a lot for people. I think it would let people reach across party lines more easily. It would let people express, if someone said, I really want, John Doe to be president, and my second choice would be Dan Smith. And then someone else said, no, absolutely not. This other random person like Leroy Jenkins would be my number one pick. But we both agree that, Dan Smith would be the second best person. It's a way to bridge the gap. It's a way for people to be able to express opinions better. It removes that vice grip on our politics, and it allows things like third parties to be an actual viable option, which I think is really important. We need to be able to choose realistically beyond just Republican and Democrat. And people always talk about this healing and this divide and reaching across the aisle. And one of the ways we can do that is by having more options between all of us for who we want to run our country.
Yep, that's exactly it. So what you're saying all sounds really great, but I know that if we were to compare you to your opponent, probably the Washington State Democratic Party and the national DNC would say, well, we're going to have to support the incumbent. So why are you better than your incumbent? What are some policies that your opponent is supporting that you think he shouldn't be supporting?
So I've answered this question a lot. If you think that the Democratic Party hasn't done anything wrong, and you think that losing 1,000 seats nationwide since 2008 is fine, and they shouldn't change anything about what they're doing or what they stand for, then by all means, Adam Smith is your guy. He is as establishment as they come. He's categorized as a rank and file Democrat, and he spent 21 years being a moderate Democrat, a self-described moderate. He's in the New Democrats coalition with Debbie Wasserman Schultz. He voted in favor of the Iraq War. He voted for the Patriot Act. He voted to reinstate the Patriot Act. But then he recanted that vote because he misunderstood the same bill that was introduced to him a second time, I guess. But
of course.
So, yeah, how it goes. So much going on. But if you are happy with the establishment, then by all means, vote for him. But if you want a representative that's going to actually fight for things like Medicare for all, like HR 676. If you want a representative that recognizes that we have bigger problems than inflating the military budget, we need to invest in infrastructure. If you want a representative that recognizes that free college is the way that we're going to help curb this looming student debt crisis, that recognizes that the student debt crisis is an impending disaster for the economy, then vote for me. Because it's not going to take me 13 years to suddenly turn around a week ago and claim that I'm a progressive. It's not going to take me 21 years to step up to the plate and fight for students. It's not going to take me 21 years. It's going to take me one day to step in there and let it be known exactly what I stand for. I plan to fight for people. I plan to fight for actual working people, and not tacitly, not passively co-signing things, not trying to ride other progressive party members' coattails, but because it's what I believe in. but because fighting is in my blood. It's what I do. Fighting for the little guy, being present, being somebody that actually recognizes what people need, not corporations, not an overinflated DoD budget, but what actual people need in order to survive and be successful. And not just survive, but thrive, right? That's what our goal is. That's the American dream. And that's what I want to do from day one, not 21 years later.
So you seem very ambitious. So let's say you get elected, even though it's going to be really difficult to get much done, especially because you're a lot more progressive, and hopefully we can get a lot of progressives elected in 2018. But if you are elected, what would you say would be probably the top 3 or top couple of issues that you would probably prioritize?
My top 3 issues would be, off the bat, Medicare for all, universal health care, single payer system, push for single payer,
awesome.
Push for Medicare for all, remove college debt, because that's an unspoken bubble. It only becomes a big issue when election times happen, right? So when elections are going on, suddenly it's all the buzz, but then after they're done, no one talks about it. And I'm dealing with student debt right now. I want to see relief not in 20 years after the bubble's already burst, but now. So that's my second thing that I'd fight for. And the third thing that I'd fight for is I fight for investment in green energy. Building up this green energy economy is going to create lasting jobs for people. It's going to create manufacturing jobs actually here in the States. So we won't just be assembling things, we're going to be building things. It's going to be able to bridge this gap that we're experiencing already, this people working 2 to 3 jobs just to make ends meet, because we can provide them with good paying jobs. And you couple that with not having to worry about medical expenses, and finally being able to be free from college debt. That's going to be a huge boon to the economy. So if I had to pick 3 things, those are the 3 things that I would chase with fire and fervor.
And this is why I really want to make the case for descriptive representation. And descriptive representation, for those of you who don't know, just means getting people in Congress that look like American citizens. So, for example, we have, I don't know how many millennials we have elected. Do we have any at this point?
I think there's one, and I think she's 35. She might be 32, but I'm pretty sure she's a Republican out of, I want to say Missouri, but I could be
of course
right now.
Because you're saying things. You're a millennial. I am as well, and I'm also burdened by student debt, and it really does. I can see how it harms the economy firsthand. I mean, how do you buy a house or a car? How do you pay rent when you have student debt that's so crippling? So I mean, if you get more millennials in Congress, then that's really going to make a difference in terms of other millennials. So if you're a millennial in the 9th District of Washington, don't just get out and vote for Sarah, sign up. So on that note, what can people do to support you? Because of course, sending money is always one thing. So if you could let us know where we can do that, but also what else we can do to really try to help you be successful.
So donations are a huge thing right now for me, especially because, like you said, grassroots is very hard. Mm-hmm. It really is the hard way, but I have to say that every donation that comes in, I know how important those dollars are to people because they're important to me. I just left work a couple of hours ago, so I know how hard people work for their money because I work hard for mine. And so those donations that come in are so much more meaningful to me than just taking blind dollars from corporations. And if you go to votesarahsmith.com/donate, that's where you can donate directly to my campaign. I'm also looking for canvassing team leads. So we're already out in the field, we're already giving out literature, we're already knocking on doors, which is very exciting because we're getting started very early.
That's great.
And if I can get more people to donate, votesarahsmith.com, there's a sign up button and you can click on that and then you can let me know if you want to volunteer. I have some canvassing events coming up. My next one is on September 2nd in Bellevue. There's a progressive women's potluck that I'm putting on at the house of one of my amazing volunteers. So you can RSVP on votesarahsmith.com for that too. But those are probably going to be the biggest areas that I need help. I need some canvassing team leads and I always need donations.
Right. And I want to say the same thing that I say for other interviews as well. I know that we sound like broken records on here, but this is really, if you don't want corporate money in campaigns, then you've got to pitch in. And even $1, it sounds like it's not very much, but if a lot of people each send $1, then that can really go a long way. Now, one thing that I think is really important, Sarah, is I wanted to ask you about your state and the primary. Do you live in an open or closed primary state?
We live in the colloquial term is called a jungle primary. So essentially, the ballots come out to everybody, and then the top 2 persons with the most votes are the ones that go to the general. That can be 2 Democrats, that can be a Democrat and a Republican, that can be an independent. It can be any combination of 2, but it's only the top 2 that go into the general.
That's interesting. So how many people are running in at least the Democratic side?
Right now, it's just me and Adam that have announced our intentions to run for this district. So
okay.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's a really interesting primary. I believe in Oregon we voted on this a couple of years ago, but we ultimately rejected it to kind of make it a jungle type primary. But yeah, that sounds great. I think that what you're doing is phenomenal. You're kind of paving the way for future campaigns, and I think it's just great. So is there anything else you wanted to say before we end the interview?
Not really. If you have progressive candidates that are running in your area, that are running grassroots, by all means, donate, volunteer. They need your help so much more than you could ever imagine. And the other thing that I want to tell people is everyone keeps asking me, what can I do to make a big change in my community other than just volunteering? The answer is simple. It is run. It is not as scary as you think. Once you put your foot in the water, you can swim, I promise. Just run. If you say, we need someone strong on school board who's progressive, be that someone. One of the biggest things that my husband said is, if the ballot came today, who would you vote for? And I'm like, oh, well, it would depend who's on the ballot. He told me, be that other person on the ballot. So if you want someone who's progressive, if you want someone that's going to fight for what you want for, and there's no one on that ballot, be the person on that ballot. And don't be afraid. It's doable. It's possible. It can be done.
Exactly. And when we have people in Congress like Louis Gohmert, don't ever doubt yourself. This is one thing that somebody was considering running and just, I don't know if I could do it. We have people like Louis Gohmert in Congress. Anyone can run it. It doesn't take much. Not to compare you to Louis Gohmert, of course, but to instill confidence. I think that's really important, because what you're saying is very, very important. You've got to run. That's the only way we could really affect change, is if we get involved. So yeah, thank you so much for doing that, Sarah. Loved having you on the program. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on. I look forward to meeting up with you again soon.
All right, sounds good.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.